Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thanks for the opportunity to come and give you just a few observations about international development from a corporate perspective. A couple of quick observations before we start. As you probably saw with me being chair of Scottish Business and Community, quite a lot of involvement in, if you want to call it CSR, in the round, both in Scotland and in the UK, given my UK jobs. And one of the things that I think was coming out from some of Andrew and Colin's observations is that we don't live in silos. So it's not, I think the days of when we spoke about what business does about CSR or the third sector or government in silos is gone. And certainly as chair of SBC, whilst businesses are at the heart of that membership, and at the heart of what we do. On the board, we also have representatives from Scottish Government, one of colleagues, Scottish Enterprise and Third Sector. So it's very much, I think, in today's world, a holistic approach to how we make an impact. And that's fundamentally, I hope, what will come out of not just what I say, but what happens today. I'm going to talk specifically about this sort of case study, one or two things actually, about disaster relief at a UK level. But if I can just... Is it right click, left click, whatever? Try something. Bingo. Right. I thought it would just be useful to touch for a couple of seconds on what we are doing in the UK anyway, just to set some context to why does business do this stuff, right? I'm sure a number of you know. You'll be heavily involved in working with business, or maybe you've been in that in the past or now. But that's just a range, very quickly, of some of the UK partners that we have, but linked into at the bottom some of the Scottish ones, one of which I chair, the other one, PSYBT, I'm sure most of you will know about. And then at a local level in Edinburgh, seeing as we're here, into work. And they have some themes which are pertinent and appropriate for our international activity as well. They are either charities or that are quite close to our business in terms of communications. So telethons clearly use communications technology to be successful for whatever project they're working on. But the other key thing, and I think this is really important for any business involved in CSR or aid development, is your people. And Andrew was referring earlier to how maybe business evolving in terms of why do you do stuff. And I've no doubt in my mind that businesses basically are a sort of three-legged stool. You've clearly got your shareholders in the city and that perennial challenge of quarterly results that we live in this crazy world. But you've also got your customers, and they are critical to your short and long-term success. But not to forget your people, right? People at the heart of organisations, whether they be in the private sector, public sector, or third sector. Certainly in BT, we're very clear that unless your people are engaged in your CSR agenda, emotionally and physically, hopefully, in many cases, then the game's a bit of a bogey. It's just doing stuff because it looks good. So in all of these, we've got people engagement. In fact, in two of the cases, British Heart Foundation and Cancer Research UK, they are partner charities at a UK level because our employees voted for them. And I think that's really important and really helpful. But if you look at where technology is taking us now, one of the recent things, and there's some stuff up there about it, if you're interested, is again communications at the heart. Raising funds in the third sector and for charities is pretty challenging at the best of times, particularly just now in the recession. So one of our recent, I don't know if it's innovative, but anyway, products we brought to market, a thing called My Donate, which is free to use for charities. So I'm not going to read all this stuff out, you can see it yourself, but I think, again, we've got the capability and the capacity in the business to run big platforms and big technologies that third sector organisations and indeed people can use to actually drive forward successfully for what they're trying to achieve. But turning to the international dimension, which is really what you're interested in, just to put it in context for BT, a number of people, I suspect not you, still see BT as a UK business, and predominantly it clearly still is. But to give you context, we operate in about 170 countries around the world, serving customers of various sorts. Within that, we don't employ people in every country, but we do have employees in about 50 countries globally. And to give you a sense of change, over the last 20 years ago, when I was a good bit younger, we had about 250,000 employees in the company, virtually every one of whom was in the UK. Now there's about 95,000 in the company, of whom 20,000 are abroad, and there's only 75,000 in the UK, which is a lot less than it used to be, and presents its own challenges. So the mix of how the company sees itself in the world has fundamentally shifted, and it doesn't take a rocket scientist in the audience to know that if you look at the global communications market, clearly the expansion of the markets are going to come in some of the developing parts of the world. Far East being an obvious example, India, and places like South America and Brazil. So a lot of effort going in internationally. But we still take the same principles of what is at the heart of BT's values, I think, about what this is all about. And I think Andrew mentioned this earlier, and I personally believe this as well, as it's central to BT's beliefs, is that a lot of what we do in CSR in the UK or internationally is about helping people become more economically sustainable at a personal, at a community, or even at a national level. It isn't any good just giving them cash, or that may be part of it. But I think just giving cash is really missing a massive opportunity and not really doing the right thing. So the way I would see this is very much about helping communities, generally speaking, have the capacity to enhance what they are going to do for the future. And it is in a sense, about economics in many respects. So if we look abroad, internationally, we try and see things at two levels. One where there's strategic engagement, and that will be driven largely by where we see our business expansion coming. But secondly, because we think we're reasonably sympathetic human beings, as well as having our corporate hats on, is where there are pressing needs, where we can make a difference. So I'll give you a couple of examples. I mean, if we look at the countries where we've got a particular strategic focus just now, no big surprises. Brazil, whose economy is massively growing, a big market for BT. Hong Kong, which traditionally has been, but continues to be for various reasons. And again, not surprisingly, in India. So strategic objectives in those countries in terms of our CSR agenda. And an example there in India, there's a school which specialises a bit in our business, which is e-technology, but has got many people in it, both children and adults, interestingly, females, who are maybe struggling to get into mainstream education. So we've been working heavily with that, both in terms of contributing of the money, but also supporting amongst our own staff, to help them really drive up their capability in terms of how they use ICT. And one of the great things, even this year, must be quite a big school this actually, but in 2011, this year, which hasn't yet finished, there's over 300 of those adults that have been through that learning process have now gone into some form of employment on the back of what they've learned, which is fantastic. Clearly not all down to BT, but nonetheless, the fact that we've contributed to that is really, I think it's a great success. Help those individuals, and that's what gets, I think, the engagement for our employees, which I'd like you to keep remembering in your head. You've got to have the engagement mentally and physically and emotionally from your staff, I believe, whatever we're doing around the world. If I think at a more tactical level, on a needs-based situation, South Africa is not a country which is at the top of our agenda in terms of being at the heart of a global market, although clearly a number of companies have offices there that we serve. But we have done work in a small village which has got some significant, as many places in the African subcontinent do have clearly, the southern subcontinent, on HIV and AIDS, to help those individuals in terms of mentoring and support about what they're doing. So those are two specific examples that are out with the case study, which is lying around somewhere in tables I wanted to refer to, which is really about the British Red Cross. So you may have gathered when I spoke about some of the other ones earlier that we really put a lot of effort into building strategic partnerships where there is synergy and empathy between the ambitions of the organisation, the charity, and what's at the heart of what we can bring to bear, which has got to be, in my opinion, much more than money. And we've worked with the British Red Cross since about 2007, and initially started off not because of a crisis, but because we recognised synergy in terms really of our communication capability, but also our people capability to help them when they needed it. So we could plan for when things went a bit belly up, and they do, clearly. And the example which is quoted primarily in the case study is about the Haiti earthquake, which was clearly catastrophic and continues to be so. And when the British Red Cross deployed there instantly, they found that the mobile comms network, which they would typically use to help them communicate and deal with situations, just wasn't functioning. But because of in a sense, the pre-deployed relationship we had with them, things like satellite phones could just be switched on and activated and help them use it instantly, both in terms of voice communications, but critically, they needed to have access to the internet to understand what was going on around Haiti and communicate elsewhere, and that was done by satellite mobile comms immediately. So that whole exercise we could help them with and bring to bear. But I think beyond that, in terms of emergency relief generally, that's supported by a group of colleagues in BT in the emergency response team who are typically engineers, as you would imagine, who have the capability to both assist organisations like the British Red Cross, but secondly, to actually deploy themselves. So apart from them, who are highly trained, we also have in the company, not surprisingly given its size, a TA signal squadron, 81 signals, if anyone's in the TA or involved in it, and those guys have been deployed, for example, to the tsunami area in the past a few years to help them when emergencies cropped up where they can assist immediately. So that British Red Cross example is critical to to the approach that we would take to international involvement in CSR and international aid. And in principle, I hope what I said earlier shows you that it's not dissimilar in concept to what we do in the UK. It's more focused on certain key countries, which I think is right and proper, but the underlying principles of a strategic alignment with the organisation, getting people involved, which is really important, but supported by funding and technologies that will help achieve the outcomes are really what I think it's all about. If that can be done, then I think you can build sustainable partnerships, because there's nothing worse, I would suggest, certainly from a corporate perspective, than just investing cash in an initiative with someone finding it doesn't work and then next year it all just stops, which doesn't help either party. So in all these cases, what we're trying to do is build up long-term relationships which will be to the benefit of the organisations, or where we're talking about countries like the examples in India or indeed South Africa, see a sustained activity that helps everybody for the long term. So I hope that's given you a flavour. BT is not unique in its approach, I hope. It's evolving as we evolve our markets around the world. But I think it's taking things in the right direction. And as I said at the beginning, it tends to work best in partnership, both with, clearly, the third sector, but also with governments both in the UK or indeed in the international countries we serve. So thank you very much.